Okay, so today we're really going to dig into this idea of, actually showing what you mean instead of just talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And a great example of this popped into my head. This high schooler, Devin Marshall, he did this speech about how much salt we actually eat.
Right.
And I mean, he could have just like thrown a bunch of numbers at us, right?
Oh, yeah.
But no, he like wheeled out this huge box and starts scooping out salt. Like 1 cup is the recommended amount per month.
Wow.
And then bam, 3 cups, almost 2 pounds. That's
Yeah.
what like the average American eats in a month.
Oh, my gosh.
It's crazy,
Yeah.
right? And he doesn't stop there. He multiplies that by 12 and builds this giant pyramid of 1414 Morton salt containers.
No way.
Yeah. So that's almost 24 pounds of salt representing a whole year's worth.
Oh, my gosh.
And that image, right, that physical mountain of salt, it just sticks with you way more than just hearing some statistics.
Oh, absolutely.
It makes it so real.
Yeah, you really get a sense of the scale in a way that just numbers can't really capture.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that the whole thing was sparked by Devin's own experience. He was diagnosed with high blood pressure.
Oh, wow.
And that like really fueled this incredibly effective demonstration.
Right.
It wasn't just about the data. It was about making the data real.
Yeah, making it visceral, almost like something you could taste and feel.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving deep into today, how to make the most of visual aids and presentations.
Right. We've got some really fascinating material here that breaks down all sorts of things, the different types of visuals you can use, how to prepare them in a really smart way, and the best strategies for presenting them so they really hit home.
Yeah, because we all know how much easier it is to learn something when you can actually see it.
Absolutely. And especially for our listeners who, are often busy juggling lots of things and need to grasp information quickly and thoroughly.
Mm,
This deep dive is going to give you a clear framework and some memorable examples to really boost your communication skills.
exactly. So jump right in. Let's start with the different kinds of visual aids you might want to consider. First up, objects and models. It seems pretty straightforward, right?
Right.
If you're trying to explain how a new type of ski binding works, bring the actual binding.
Right.
If you're talking about Peruvian doll making, show off some dolls. Make the idea concrete.
Yeah, I love that. It's like, here it is, see for yourself.
Exactly. There's an immediacy there.
And bringing in a real object or a model can really clarify things that might otherwise feel kind of abstract.
Oh, totally. Like imagine a medical instructor trying to teach CPR.
Oh, yeah.
Describing where to put your hands and how to do compressions, it's one thing.
Right.
But seeing it done on a dummy makes it so much clearer.
Absolutely. It makes it easier to remember, too.
For sure. But of course, there are limitations.
Right.
As our source points out, size can be an issue.
Oh, definitely.
Or just, the availability of the object. Like you mentioned a rare suit of armor earlier.
Yeah, good luck trying to get that into a classroom.
Exactly. So when the actual thing or a model isn't practical, what do?
What?
Photographs and drawings, right?
Yeah, this can be really helpful.
But our material points out something that seems obvious, but it's easy to forget. Holding up a regular-sized photo or a drawing from a book just doesn't work for a large group.
Right. It's too small for most of the audience to even see.
Exactly. It just ends up fragmenting everyone's attention as they're trying to get a glimpse.
Yeah. You want everyone to be able to see the visual clearly at the same time.
And that's where technology comes in.
Oh, yeah.
Things like PowerPoint or Google Slides become super important.
Totally. They let you display photos and drawings so that everyone can see them.
Exactly. Like imagine showing a picture of the Angkor Wat ruins.
Wow.
You can project that onto a screen, and everyone gets to experience the scale and detail.
That's a great example.
Or a drawing that illustrates the challenges faced by someone with dyslexia.
Right.
That can make a complex issue so much easier to understand.
Absolutely. Visuals like that can really bridge the gap between abstract concepts and concrete understanding.
For sure. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about numbers graphs.
Okay.
These are essential for making sense of complex data.
Right. They can reveal patterns that you just wouldn't see in a table of numbers.
Exactly. And there are a few different types we should talk about. First, line graphs.
Yeah.
When are these most effective?
Line graphs are perfect for showing trends and changes over time.
Okay.
It's like that continuous line is tracing a journey.
I like that.
Our material gives a great example about U.S. food spending. It compares how much people spent at grocery stores versus restaurants from like 2010 to 2020.
Oh, interesting.
And you can see these two lines moving. Sometimes they get closer, sometimes further apart. And there's this really clear turning point around 2015 where spending in restaurants actually overtook grocery store spending for the first time. And
Yeah.
that visual representation of the trend makes it so much easier to understand than just a table of numbers.
Yeah, you can see the relationship between the two and how it changed over time.
Exactly. And it's that over time aspect that line graphs are really good at.
So it's a continuous line that really reinforces the idea of change over time.
Right. And it makes it easier for your audience to see those patterns and trajectories.
Cool. Then we have pie graphs. I always think of these as showing how a whole is divided into different parts.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
So when are they the best choice?
Pie graphs are really good for illustrating simple distribution patterns or proportions.
Okay.
Like imagine you want to show how marital status among working women has changed over time. The material uses the example of 1900 and 2018.
A big time span.
Right. And with the pie graph, you immediately get a sense of the percentages of single, married, and widowed or divorced women in the workforce at each of those points in time.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's like a snapshot of how those proportions have changed over a century.
Interesting. But there's a catch, right?
There is. You got to keep the number of slices in the pie relatively small.
Oh, right. Too many and it's just a mess.
Exactly. Ideally, you want between 2 and 5 segments and definitely no more than 8.
So each slice needs to be clear and meaningful.
Right. Otherwise, it just becomes a jumbled mess.
Gotcha. And then there are bar graphs. These are great for making direct comparisons, right?
Absolutely. Bar
So-
graphs are awesome for comparing 2 or more things, and they're usually pretty easy to understand.
Yeah, even if you're not a statistician.
Exactly. The material uses this example about the politics of race in America.
Okay.
They compare things like median household income, unemployment rates, and the percentage of college degrees across different racial and ethnic groups,
Interesting.
specifically Black, white, and Hispanic populations. And the bar graph really highlights the differences and similarities.
Oh, I see. So those vertical or horizontal bars, they make the comparison super obvious.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And that can be really powerful for making a point.
All right, let's move on from graphs to charts.
Yeah.
Now, charts feel a bit different to me.
Mm-hmm.
When would you choose a chart over a graph?
Charts are really good when you need to summarize a lot of information,
Okay.
especially if it's more text-based than numerical.
Sure, not like trends over time.
Right, more like lists or hierarchical structure.
Oh.
Like the example in our material about the risks and rewards of work.
Okay.
They present this list of the most dangerous jobs in the U.S., things like loggers, fishing workers, aircraft pilots, and so on.
Hmm.
And they include the number of fatal work injuries per 100,000 workers.
Right.
And you couldn't really show that kind of information effectively in a pie graph or a bar graph.
Too much.
Exactly. But a chart can organize it really well.
So it's like a well-organized list.
Yeah, and the key is to keep it uncluttered.
Right.
Aim for no more than 7 or 8 items on a single chart.
Otherwise, break it up.
Exactly. If you have more information, use multiple charts.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about something more dynamic like video?
Ooh, video can be really powerful.
Yeah, it can grab people's attention.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Like, think about showing a low-speed crash test to demonstrate safety features.
Oh, yeah.
Or a short clip of different roller coasters.
That would be fun.
It can bring a level of realism and excitement that you just can't get with static visuals.
Right. It can create an emotional connection.
Exactly. But there are some important things to keep in mind.
Like what?
Keep the clips short.
Okay.
Around 30 seconds is usually a good guideline,
Otherwise, you lose people's focus.
right? And make sure the cueing and editing are really smooth.
So it doesn't feel clunky.
Exactly. And don't forget about resolution.
Oh, right. Blurry videos, the worst.
Yeah, a pixelated video on a big screen can make your whole presentation look unprofessional.
Just make sure it's high quality.
Absolutely. Okay, now this next category is kind of interesting.
What's that?
The speaker as a visual aid.
Oh, that's intriguing. Tell me more.
This is where you use your own body and your actions to demonstrate something.
Oh, I see.
Like imagine someone conducting an orchestra or
Yeah.
showing the steps of a magic trick
Right
or
there.
using sign language or even something practical like how to apply a tourniquet.
Wow. Those are great examples.
They can be really engaging for the audience.
Yeah, it feels more personal.
And it can actually help the speaker feel more connected to their material.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it can even help with nervousness.
Really?
Our material uses this analogy of a TV chef.
I love that.
You know, they demonstrate the key steps of a recipe and then boom, they reveal the finished dish.
Oh, that's so smart.
And the key here is practice.
Right.
You have to coordinate your words and your actions really smoothly.
So it all flows together.
Exactly. All right, so we've talked about all sorts of different visual aids.
Yeah, we have.
Now let's talk about the technology that often helps us with these things.
Okay.
Presentation programs.
So things like PowerPoint, Google Slides, Keynote.
Yeah, exactly, and Prezi and all sorts of others.
So what's the big advantage of using these programs?
Well, they let you integrate all sorts of visual aids into a single presentation.
Oh, I see.
You can have charts, graphs, photos, videos, all in one place.
And it all looks really professional.
Right. And these programs have become really standard in a lot of professional settings, especially in business.
Makes sense. But of course, there are some downsides too, right?
Oh, yeah. Any powerful tool can be misused.
Right. Our material talks about some of the pluses and minuses of presentation technology.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the pitfalls we should be aware of?
Well, one of the big ones is overusing flashy transitions and animations.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely seen that.
The material specifically mentions Prezi,
Okay.
with its zooming and panning effects.
Right.
And while that can be attention-grabbing at first, it can also become really distracting.
Especially if it's overdone.
Exactly. One expert even said that Prezi can turn a speech into an overly animated spectacle.
Oh, wow.
And that can actually detract from the content.
Yeah, you don't want the visuals to overshadow the message.
Exactly. And then there's the classic death by PowerPoint,
Oh, yeah, we've all been there.
where the slides are just filled with text.
And the speaker just reads them word for word.
It's so boring.
It's like reading from a script.
And it totally misses the point of using visuals.
Right. So the key takeaway is to use these tools strategically.
Exactly. Don't put everything you're going to say on the screen.
It's just the stuff that's best illustrated visually.
Right. Choose what to illustrate, not just what to display.
I love that distinction.
The material gives this great example about medical robots.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
The speaker used simple colored lines on an image of the robot to represent these invisible light whiskers that it uses for navigation.
Oh, that's so clever.
Yeah, it's a great example of using technology in a creative and targeted way.
To make something abstract visible.
Exactly. And this leads us to that using public speaking in your career scenario from the material.
Okay. What was that one?
It's about a veterinarian who needs to talk to the city council about pet licensing regulations.
Oh, interesting.
And they have all this data about the estimated dog population versus the number of registered licenses,
Mm-hmm.
and also data on the number of citations issued for unleashed pets.
Okay.
And the question is, which of those data sets would be best for a chart versus a graph?
Oh, that's a good one.
And if a graph is the better choice, which type of graph would be best?
So bar graph, line graph, or pie graph?
Right. And
That's a great real-world challenge for our listeners to think about.
yeah, love give them a moment to ponder that.
Okay, listeners, take a second and think about how you would present that data.
And we'll come back and discuss it in a moment.
All right, so for the data comparing the estimated dog population to the number of licenses issued over the past 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking a bar graph would be really effective.
Oh, yeah.
We could have side-by-side bars for each year showing the difference.
Exactly.
Or maybe even a line graph to show the trends over time and see if that gap is getting bigger or smaller.
Right. Both of those would work really well.
Now, for the citations data, if the numbers are relatively low,
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking a simple chart might be best.
Okay.
Maybe comparing the number of citations to the target enforcement goal or the number of complaints they received.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And a pie graph doesn't really feel right for either scenario
I agree.
because we're not looking at parts of a whole.
Exactly. We're comparing things over time and between different categories.
So bar graph or line graph for the dog population and licenses
Mm-hmm.
and a chart for the citations data.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so we figured out what kinds of visuals we want to use.
Now we need to make sure we prepare them effectively.
Exactly. Our material gives us some great guidelines for this.
Right.
First, prepare well in advance. Why is that so important?
It gives you time to really think through your visuals and integrate them into your presentation.
Okay, so not just throwing something together at the last minute.
Exactly. Rushing usually leads to poorly designed visuals.
Right.
And it doesn't give you time to practice.
Which can be a disaster.
Oh, yeah. Fumbling with your visuals during a presentation is never a good look.
It totally undermines your credibility.
Right. So give yourself plenty of time.
So you can be creative and make sure everything looks good.
Exactly. And the next guideline is to keep your visuals simple.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means avoiding clutter.
Right.
Don't try to cram too much information onto one slide.
Like multiple charts and photos and tons of text.
Yeah, exactly. And too many fonts and colors.
It's just overwhelming.
Right. Your visual should support your words, not distract from them.
So focus on one key message per visual.
Yeah. Or a small number of related points.
Gotcha. The next point is to make sure your visuals are large enough for everyone to see.
Oh, yeah, that's essential.
What's a good way to check this?
Our material suggests actually going to the back of the room.
Oh, smart.
and looking at your visuals from that perspective.
If you can't see them from there, they need to be bigger.
Exactly. And another tip about text,
Okay.
don't use all caps.
Really?
It might seem like that would make it easier to read,
Yeah.
but actually big blocks of all caps are harder for our eyes to process.
Oh, interesting.
So save all caps for short titles or for emphasis.
Good to know.
Hmm.
Next up, use a limited amount of text.
Less is more.
For sure.
Stick to keywords, brief phrases, and bullet points.
Keep it concise.
Exactly. The material suggests aiming for no more than about 6 lines of text per slide.
Okay.
And if you're combining text with images, you might need even less.
So it doesn't look crowded.
Right. And if you have a lot of points to cover...
Use multiple slides.
Exactly. Don't try to cram everything onto one.
They give a good example about a slide on the Harbin Ice Festival.
Oh, yeah.
It has a beautiful image. The name of the festival, a key fact, and a statistic about visitors.
And that's it.
Super simple and effective.
Okay, let's talk about fonts.
Does it really matter what font you use?
It can make a surprising difference.
Totally.
Some fonts are just harder to read than others.
Oh, yeah, some are really decorative.
Exactly. And those can be distracting.
So stick to clear, simple fonts.
Right. And make sure the size is appropriate for the room.
And no all caps.
Right. And don't use too many different font styles.
Okay.
Maybe one for titles and one for body text.
Keep it consistent.
Exactly. And most presentation software has built-in themes and templates that can help with this.
Oh, that's helpful. What about color?
Color can be really powerful,
It can add a lot of visual interest.
but you have to be careful.
Okay.
There are some bad color combinations to avoid. Like what?
Red and green.
Oh, right.
That can be hard for people with color blindness.
Okay.
And also similar shades that don't have enough contrast.
Like light gray text on a white background.
Exactly. That's really hard to read.
And what about using lots of different colors?
It's usually best to stick to a limited palette.
Okay.
Maybe 1 or 2 for the background, 1 for titles, and 1 for text.
And use them consistently.
Right. That creates a more unified and professional look.
Last but not least, using images strategically.
Right. Don't just throw in random pictures.
Yeah, they should have a purpose.
Exactly. Our material says that irrelevant images can actually distract your audience.
Oh, wow.
So make sure any image you use is directly related to your topic.
And high resolution.
Yes. At a good size.
And same for graphs and charts.
Mm-hmm. Make sure they're clean, simple, and well labeled.
And for videos.
Make sure they're smoothly integrated and add value to your presentation.
All right, so we've prepared our amazing visual aids.
Now we need to present them effectively, right? Our material has a whole section on this.
Mm-hmm.
First, display your visuals where everyone can see them.
That seems obvious, but there are some nuances.
Like what?
If you're using a physical object, make sure it's positioned so everyone has a clear view.
Okay.
And if you're using a screen stand to the side so you don't block the image.
Right.
And use a pointer if you need to.
And watch out for shadows.
Yes, those can be really distracting.
What about passing objects around the audience?
The material strongly advises against that.
Really?
It can be a big distraction.
People start focusing on the object instead of you.
Exactly. And the same goes for handouts.
Don't hand them out during the presentation.
Right. It creates competition for people's attention.
So wait until the end.
Exactly.
Okay, the next point is to display your visuals only when you're discussing them.
Right.
Why is that important?
Because leaving up a previous visual can be distracting.
Oh, yeah. People might still be looking at it.
Exactly. So if you're using physical objects, keep them out of sight until you need them. And if you're using presentation software,
Use blank slides.
yes,
Well,
before and after the slides with content.
That's a good tip. Now, this next guideline is super important.
What's that?
Explain your visual aids clearly.
Oh, yeah, they don't speak for themselves.
Don't just say, as you can see here, and move on.
You need to interpret the visual for your audience.
Okay.
Describe its key features and explain the meaning of the data.
Give them context.
Exactly. Like the example they give with the map of the Yellowstone supervolcano.
Mm-hmm.
Without explanation, it's just a bunch of colors.
You need to tell people what it means.
Right, and practice your explanations so you can deliver them smoothly.
And don't forget to make eye contact.
Oh, yeah, that's crucial.
So talk to your audience, not to your visual aid.
It can be easy to get fixated on the screen.
Especially if you're nervous.
Right, but you have to make an effort to connect with your audience.
Why? Looking at them.
Exactly, and practice, practice, practice.
We've heard it before.
But it's so important.
Especially when you're using visual aids.
You need to practice how you're going to introduce them, refer to them, and transition between them.
So it all feels seamless.
Exactly. And if you're using presentation software,
Mm-hmm.
you need to know the flow of your slides.
When they appear and disappear.
Right. And what you're going to say during each one?
And practice using the mouse or keyboard or whatever you're using to control the slides,
Until it feels natural.
so you're not looking down all the time.
Exactly. And try to rehearse without looking at the screen too much.
Like you're actually presenting to an audience.
Right. They give a good example about a video on the living wage solution.
Oh, yeah.
It shows how important good coordination and eye contact are.
And finally, check the room and equipment.
Always.
What should we be looking out for?
Make sure the computer projector and screen are all working properly.
Okay.
And if you're using audio or video, make sure that's working too.
Right.
And if possible, have a technician on hand.
Just in case.
If you can't visit the space beforehand.
Get there early
Yes, at least an hour early.
to test everything,
And always bring a backup of your presentation on a flash drive.
even if you're using your own laptop.
You never know what could happen.
So to sum up, well-prepared and skillfully presented visual aids can really make your message sing.
They make it more engaging, more understandable, and more memorable.
They're not just an optional extra.
They're an essential part of effective communication.
So let's recap what we've learned today.
Okay.
We've talked about all sorts of different visual aids,
From objects to images to graphs to videos.
and even the speaker themselves.
We've talked about the power and the pitfalls of presentation technology.
And we've gone through the key guidelines for preparing and presenting visuals effectively.
Simplicity, visibility, relevance, and seamless integration.
It's all about making your message come alive.
And making it stick with your audience.
So for our listeners out there,
Mm-hmm.
think about a recent presentation you saw, or maybe even gave yourself.
And ask yourself,
How could the principles we've talked about today have made it even better?
could you have used a different type of visual? Could you have presented your visuals more effectively?
It's all about experimenting and finding what works best for you.
And for your audience,
And remember the key terms we've discussed:
like graph line, graph pi.
bar graph chart and font.
These are tools that can help you communicate more powerfully
So use them wisely.
and make your message shine.
That's it for today,
Thanks for listening.
and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.